Hello to everyone out there in podcast land. Of course, there is a little bit of a shadow, a pall over this particular episode of The Fortress of Rock as we get episode 204 going here on July the 25th, 2025. It's been a few days, but when you lose one of the greats, one of the heavyweights of classic rock, um, I can barely come up with maybe 5 or 6 names that if they had passed, it would be more significant than losing Ozzy Osbourne. And you probably could figure out that's what we're going to devote a lot of discussion and time here to in segment one, of course, News of the World, our tribute to another fallen rock and roll warrior, the late great Freddie Mercury and Queen. So, yeah, let's just spend a few minutes talking about Ozzy Osbourne. I know the tributes came pouring in when the news hit. I actually found out from my nephew. He texted me and said, one of my coworkers just told me Ozzy Osbourne has died. And I'm usually pretty up on things. I'm not a slave to my cell phone or to the internet, but for that one to slip through, I'm sure I would have found out an hour or two after, but not the most shocking news I've ever heard in my life, given the rough life that Ozzy Osbourne lived. A lot of it due to his own behavior. But I guess in some way you almost can call this a rock and roll fairy tale. In over the years here on the Fortress of Rock, I have complained about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and complained about how we don't give bands or performers their due until it's too late. Performers, great performers in rock and roll history die, and then the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame steps in and says, oh, we should honor them. At least with Ozzy Osbourne, and again, this is why I kind of call it a fairy tale ending. In many ways, he got the send-off that a lot of others haven't. Of course, he has been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice as a member of Black Sabbath. And now I'll admit, a friend of mine were talking about it after we heard the news. And I couldn't even remember for sure. And you guys know, I'm usually pretty good on my rock and roll knowledge, but also that gets canceled out a little bit by my disdain for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I couldn't even remember 100% if Ozzy had gotten in as a solo artist as well. And he said, yeah, let me look it up. And sure enough, just here within the last year or two. And then I was like, yeah, now I remember. I remember the tributes and the performances. But that's how cynical, again, I am about the Rock Hall of Fame. But then Ozzy got in twice, right? Fitting. Very, very fitting. And then, of course, he got back to the beginning. He got the great final send-off with his friends in Black Sabbath, along with all these other great performers and bands that jumped in over in England to pay tribute to Ozzy and to pay tribute to Black Sabbath. And how scary is it? I mean, we see this and hear this time and time again, from that old couple down the street all the way to actors and musicians when they call it quits, when they retire, it's not too long after, in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases, before it seems like that was them pulling the plug. I know it's a harsh analogy, but it's true. Because I believe it was 17 days from the end of Back to the Beginning until Ozzy Osbourne passed. That's, again, proof. The old couple analogy, of course, is that when a couple has been married for so long and been together for so long, and they know each other's rhythms and patterns and habits and behavior, that if they're together 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, and one passes, the other usually isn't too far behind. Again, I am extremely happy. I know the family, Sharon, of course, and Jack, and of course Ozzy's daughter, they're all mourning. But I think they should take comfort, hopefully, in the fact that Ozzy did have a full life. He lived it the way he wanted. He was a legend. He got to go out on his own terms, outside of the health issues dragging him down a little bit. Now, for me personally, let me give you a few minutes of personal reflection here about Ozzy Osbourne. Now, I'm not going to pretend that Ozzy Osbourne was my favorite performer ever. Especially with I am not a Black Sabbath fan. You guys, I've mentioned this before. I am not a Black Sabbath fan at all. But Ozzy as a solo artist, I was very much into. And of course, that takes me back to when he began his solo journey with Blizzard of Ozz. So with Ozzy's solo career, and I'm sorry I had to take a very quick break there, if you could tell a little bit of a gap, because of course I start recording and the fire alarm, the smoke detector in the studio, starts chirping literally 4 minutes after I start talking. And I did not want to ditch all of that great content from the beginning, so I had to pause and change a battery. Please forgive me. So again, Ozzy's solo career is what impacted me more than Black Sabbath. I have memories of the first time I listened to Blizzard of Ozz with a friend of mine on a cassette player, sitting in my driveway in late fall 1980. And I would, now where I can be honest and say that Ozzy in Black Sabbath didn't have any influence on my rock and roll upbringing at all. I can also say, honestly, Blizzard of Ozz was one of the most important, influential albums to me growing up. There are 8 or 10 albums that I would put in that group, and we'll get to one of them actually later on when we travel back in time with Doc Brown. But albums like Billy Squier's Don't Say No, Loverboy's Get Lucky. You know, obviously, I'm biased towards Van Halen. I'm biased towards Kiss. And you have your group of albums that influenced you, that impacted you as you grew up. If you're a little bit younger, then I'm sure you're going to throw Appetite for Destruction in there, or Pearl Jam's 10, or maybe Soundgarden, whether it's Badmotorfinger or Super Unknown. There's that group of albums that you always will look back fondly on. and you'll remember the best times of your life, maybe the worst times of your life, because that music got you through life's speed bumps. That's where Blizzard of Oz falls for me. Now, again, I will be honest again, completely and totally honest. No BS here on the Fortress of Rock. After Blizzard of Oz, while I enjoyed a lot of Ozzy's music throughout the years and the decades after Blizzard of Oz, none of the other albums came even close for me. And I think that's why I say respect Ozzy, love Ozzy, always willing to listen to Ozzy when he comes on the radio, but he's never been one of my all-time greats. He's not up there in the pantheon. But that does not mean in any way, shape, or form we do not show the ultimate respect for the ultimate sinner. Rest in peace, Ozzy Osbourne. Unfortunately, we have more death to discuss. Now, we are going to take, on occasion here throughout this episode, some detours into some mellow, soft rock. So be forewarned. And this is one of those moments. And I always talk about growing up, and I always talk about influences, because that is what's important if you are a true music fan. You grew up with music, it shaped you, it influenced you. And as I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, it got you through the rough times. Rock and roll is always there for you in the best of times and the worst of times. Now, this is not one of my favorite songs of all time, but I remember growing up, I would have been, I believe, about 12 years old when this song was a huge hit, and that was in my Casey Kasem America's Top 40 days. And as I've always said, the great thing about music in the 70s and the 80s was the diversity. And anybody who knows me knows I am not a DEI guy by any stretch, because that's forced on you. When it's organic, like the music was in the 70s and the 80s, and we're listening to Earth, Wind, and Fire side by side with Van Halen. Look that one up, kids. They actually went on a tour together, and I was there. You would listen to disco, and then you would listen to Kiss or Kansas or Styx. And it carried on through into the 80s, where we had country music. Now, I know country music now is pretty mainstream and very, very popular. But there was a run there, bleeding over from the late 70s into the 80s, where you had all these different genres. Of course, country, Kenny Rogers, Waylon Jennings, Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson, all mixed in with the new wave bands and the punk bands and disco as it was fading out, and the hard rock and the hair metal. It was a glorious, great time. All that prefacing the death of one Chuck Mangione. And yes, there are probably a few of you out there going, why are we talking about a horn player, a jazz legend on the Fortress of Rock? Because again, small influence, but an influence nonetheless. When Feels So Good by Chuck Mangione was a huge hit, and again, I was about 12 years old, I was taking in all this music. I was taking it all in. All different genres, all different types. And even something like Feels So Good, for that to be a huge success, just told me even more that we were living in diverse, wonderful times. where it didn't matter what type of music you played as long as it was good and true. And you're never going to get me to say that about the last 25 to 30 years of music. But the previous 25 to 30 years, yes. Chuck Mangione, again, known for the massive hit Feels So Good, legendary jazz horn player. Unfortunately, he, along with Ozzy Osbourne, passed away here within the last week. And then, of course, we've still got one more passing in the world of rock and roll to cover. George Kooymans was co-founder and guitar player for the band Golden Earring. And of course, we know the stories about Golden Earring, the massive gap between their two big hits, Radar Love and then Twilight Zone. But the amazing thing, as I was researching the death of George Kooymans, the interesting and amazing thing about Golden Earring, very rare. You could point to a band like U2 as an example, but Golden Earring, going back all the way to the late 60s, up until present day, because they were still working on, a one-off show here, a one-off show there. They kept the same core four members intact. They would take time off, no doubt about that. It wasn't like they were recording, putting out new albums every couple years or touring all that often. But when they got back together, whenever that might be, it was always those core four members of Golden Earring that stood together. And so now this, of course, would be a devastating blow to any future plans I would think Golden Earring would have, except for maybe a tribute concert. So George Kooymans joins Chuck Mangione and Ozzy Osbourne as we unfortunately have to spend the beginning of the Fortress of Rock this week talking about our fallen rock and roll and pop music warriors. So let's get out of the death, shall we? We do have a few things to discuss here in News of the World outside of mortality. I'm not going to say it's all pretty and beautiful. Let's start off with the Steve Miller Band. Last week we reported the fact, and yes, I was very, very cynical about it and still am, where Steve Miller cancels his entire tour schedule for 2025, claiming extreme weather as being the reason why. And then, of course, he had Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders backing him up. And yes, Steve Miller mentioned the fans, said, oh, it's too hot out. But then he went on a little bit too far, in my opinion, talking about extreme flooding and hurricanes and tornadoes. Little bit of a drama queen going that far. Some of you are probably on Steve Miller's side. I am not. The only thing that I would say is Steve Miller is older, so in that sense, I get it. But otherwise, his excuse falls flat. Because you can't tell me he couldn't have scheduled his shows indoors. There are plenty of indoor venues and arenas he could have gone to if he chose to play inside instead of outside. And that's where we're dealing with the heat issue. I'm not going to listen. I'm not even going to going to justify the garbage about hurricanes and tornadoes. That stuff's been around for decades and decades and decades. That's BS. Okay? And now, as we follow up on that story from last week, some people have posted, and we saw this a couple years ago with the Black Keys. Now, the Black Keys blamed their management. They didn't go so far as to blame the weather. But remember when the Black Keys blamed their management, mismanagement, and they had booked this massive stadium tour, huge arenas, and then all of a sudden they weren't selling maybe but 15%, 20% of the available seats, weeks and weeks and even months into the tour announcement. So is that something that's going on here with the Steve Miller Band? Because people were posting pictures after the announcement, screenshots from Ticketmaster, Live Nation, whoever, showing the same thing. 75-80% of these venues still having seats available. Now, of course, statement has to come out saying, oh, that's garbage, that's garbage. Band members defending Steve Miller, and I would expect nothing less. But I am a big conspiracy theorist because I'm very cynical, and we get lied to day in and day out from our government, from anybody and everybody outside of our closest family and friends. And hopefully they're not lying to you. But outside of that circle of trust, they're all lying to you. You get lied to every day. Why should I believe Steve Miller? Again, there are countless reasons how and why this could have been avoided. And to go to such extremes with an excuse bothers me very, very much. Because another one of my complaints has always been, as you guys know, with ticket prices and fees skyrocketing, and these bands and these performers wanting us to shell out the money sometimes 6, 7, 8, 9 months ahead of time, so they can earn interest on it, and we can't, and we're getting nothing for our money. Again, until 6, 7, 8 months out. I've always been very cynical about that. Nobody ever calls the performers out on this. And I know it takes time to set up a tour schedule and get everything together logistically. I get it. You can't say, hey, next week we're going to be showing up in your town. I understand. But sometimes the lead time is really pathetic and ridiculous. And I know, again, a lot of that money they need ahead of time. They need it up front to funnel it into setting up the tour. But they can also stash that money away and earn interest on it to help with the costs. And now with these pictures, these screenshots and images of low ticket sales for the Steve Miller Band, and then this ridiculous climate excuse, I have just become that much more cynical about these bands and these performers, and of course still, to this day, and always most likely, Ticketmaster and Live Nation. Little bit more cynicism, and then we'll move on to some concert news and a few other tidbits. AI. Okay, we've got a lot of issues now that are bleeding into the world of music with AI. I can't remember. I don't think I told you this story, and I'm not going to go into great detail on it, but this is a nice little preface for the story that I am going to tell you this week about Toto. A couple weeks back, listening to a radio show that I love. It's not a music show, it's a sports show, but they talk a little bit about pop culture, and they played a clip, about a 30-second clip of a song that they said was at the top of the Spotify charts. They played this song. I thought, hey, it doesn't sound too awful, doesn't sound too bad. The opening guitar riff for about 5 or 10 seconds reminded me of Ghost Riders on the Sky by the Outlaws. So I listened to about 30 seconds of it. I thought, not bad. Not bad. Then they came out and they said it's AI generated. Somebody put this out, came up with a band name. This music was all, again, AI generated, and people started gravitating towards it on Spotify, went to the top, the upper reaches of their charts in terms of most streamed songs. Now, part of the reason I'm not going to tell you the band name or the song is because I don't want to encourage this. But now we've got another troubling instance of AI in the music world. Again, and I'm going to call out Spotify here in detail in just a minute, because as I just said, they were part of the problem with this previous song. Now, Toto. Now, Toto does not put out new music anymore. It's sad. I guess they have some kind of an agreement, or there was a settlement of a lawsuit that said they wouldn't put out new music, but they could still tour under the name Toto. But the members, current and past, still are friendly, and they still do solo projects, and they'll do guest appearances on each other's projects. So Toto's still friendly for the most part, the people from what we'd call the classic lineup, right? Now, Steve Lukather is the one classic lineup member who is still in Toto consistently every show. But again, they don't put out new music. So somehow, an instrumental leaked onto Toto's Spotify page. An instrumental called Name This Night. Again, no vocals, just an instrumental. Turns out it was completely fake, AI generated. And it was on all the major streaming music services. And I guess Steve Lukather had to petition Spotify to take it off. And yes, they finally did. I guess it's still popping up on Tidal and popping up on Apple Music, which is a shame. And, Steve Lukather basically said it's sad that it's come to this, where I have to point out to Spotify that that's not Toto. Now, here's where I get off a little bit in terms of my anger on Spotify. So we've now just given you 2 instances, not one, but 2 instances of AI-generated music fooling people. And Spotify doesn't seem to really care. Personally, I don't trust Spotify at all. Why? When I started really listening to Spotify years and years ago, I was late to the game, but now I do listen to Spotify. It's probably a 50-50 split between YouTube and Spotify, where I go to try to listen to new music. But when you go on Spotify, as well as YouTube, YouTube seems to be a lot cleaner and more accurate. When you go on Spotify and you say, hey, I like this band, you look them up, they show you their catalog, and you go, yeah, I'll follow them. Right? Shouldn't be that difficult, shouldn't be that hard. You looked them up, you saw their catalog pop up on the screen, you said, yep, I'll follow them, they're one of my favorite bands, or I really like them, or I used to like them, whatever the case may be. Well, I keep getting burned by Spotify because they have something which should be, in theory, brilliant. And it used to be a lot better, called the Release Radar. And I'm sure a lot of you out there are going, yeah, I know about that. The Release Radar comes out every Friday. And in theory, what the Release Radar is supposed to do is supposed to look at all the bands you follow and all the music you've added to your library, given a thumbs up to, whatever you want to call it. I don't like the fact that, by the way, Spotify won't let you do a thumbs down to say, I don't want to listen to this anymore. If you happen to try a new album or a new song, all they do is go, oh, you listen to that. So that's going to go in your profile, where you should be able to go, no, I didn't like it. I don't want you to give me more music like that. Just because I listen to it doesn't mean I like it. I have to listen to it in order to find out if I like it or not. They don't factor that in. But also, and this is even more insidious than that, two bands in particular I can point to from the 80s. Of course, this is classic rock, the fortress of rock. That's what we're all about here. Two bands from the 80s I absolutely love. Still around to this day, still touring. Loverboy and Zebra. I followed both of them on Spotify. And now, what pops up on my new release radar all the time? This there's supposedly a rapper or a hip-hop artist called Loverboy, and now that stuff drops into my release radar every time he puts out a new song. It's not the same Loverboy, you idiots, and I have double and triple checked. I'm following Mike Reno and Paul Dean, that Loverboy. And the same thing with Zebra. I don't know if it's K-pop or what it is. I won't listen to it because, again, if I listen to it, then they're going to say, oh, you're listening to it, so you must like it. Even if I don't say I like it and give it a thumbs up. It's frustrating beyond all belief. So as much as I try to keep this release radar every Friday pure and true to my actual musical tastes, it's not possible with Spotify because their algorithms, whatever kind of AI they've got working behind the scenes, is garbage and doesn't work well. Now, am I supposed to unfollow my Zebra and unfollow my Loverboy just to avoid getting these other versions of Zebra and Loverboy? I shouldn't have to go through all that. But again, Spotify is far from flawless. And now we're seeing it with Toto having to fight to get fake Toto music taken down on Spotify. All right, couple little things when it comes to touring news. Def Leppard has announced a 12-show Las Vegas residency at the Coliseum. Of course, that is at Caesar's Palace. Those shows are in February of 2026. And then, of course, we mentioned last week the announcement about the Paul McCartney tour. Well, 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry. That was 2 weeks ago. I tried to get tickets last week. That's what I was thinking of. I actually tried to get tickets for the Chicago shows. And if I mentioned this last Friday, I apologize. But yeah, if I didn't, What a waste of time. I stood no chance of getting a ticket to see Paul McCartney at either show in Chicago. He has added, this week's news, he has added one more show to the tour, October the 25th at the Alamo Dome in San Antonio. So those of you outside in the area in Texas, you do have a new chance to go see Paul McCartney. Good luck. And again, talking about AI and technology, I still don't believe that the bots aren't still buying up all the tickets. I don't believe it. I just don't see how it's possible for me to want to buy tickets for Paul McCartney. Get in on the website and Ticketmaster an hour before they go on sale. Wait there. Let my computer sit there, logged in, and then when it's time to jump on to buy tickets, I'm told, you only have 23,000 people ahead of you. Whatever. I don't believe it. Sorry, I don't believe it. I still think the bots are getting in and buying up all the tickets. All right. Last couple of little items here before we move on to breakdown. If you're into the Spinal Tap movies, I'll admit I have not watched This Is Spinal Tap. I'm not a big fan of the actors in it. Their comedy is not my cup of tea. Maybe I'll eventually get around to watching it now that Spinal Tap 2, The End Continues, is coming out. I'm also not a big fan of Rob Reiner, the director. I think he's an absolute jerk in real life. But if that's your thing, you can get out online right now and watch the first trailer for Spinal Tap 2, The End Continues. Of course, Spinal Tap is a parody band, a heavy metal parody band. Again, maybe at some point I'll try to jump on the bandwagon, watch the first one. Maybe I'll end up loving it. I know a couple of the jokes from it and they don't do anything for me. It's not that I'm not into crude humor, believe me. I love Bachelor Party, I love Caddyshack, Hot Tub Time Machine, all personal favorites. Just something about the director, the actors in This Is Spinal Tap. Just, they've never done it for me. Then finally, for you Fleetwood Mac fans out there. Now, this is interesting because I am a big fan of out-of-print music getting back out where we can buy it and consume it. And there are still a lot of albums, classic albums from the 70s and the 80s, that you cannot find anywhere because they're out of print. More recently, for me personally, I think it was about a month ago, the final album from the Jay Giles Band, You're Getting Even While I'm Getting Odd. I used to have it when I was a kid, maybe early 20s. I don't know if I lost it, turned it in, because back in the day when we were transitioning from LPs and cassettes to CDs, you could still trade in your albums and get a decent chunk of credit for them. Now, of course, people go, oh, I should have held on to them. Phooey. But I had the final album from the Jay Giles Band. This was after Peter Wolf left. You're Getting Even While I'm Getting Odd. Great album. Out of print. You cannot find it anywhere anymore. So the good news for Fleetwood Mac fans: Buckingham Nicks, the only album by that duo before they joined Fleetwood Mac. It has been long out of print. The good news is it is going to be reissued on all the various formats: vinyl, CD, digital, and it will be out September the 19th. Again, Buckingham Nicks from 1973. Finally going to be available again on September 19th. And that's good news. I'm not a Fleetwood Mac fan, but just the fact that they're putting that back out again, maybe that gives us hope for all these other albums that are lost and just floating out there in the rock and roll atmosphere that we can't seem to grab. So that's going to do it for News of the World. Once again, I apologize for the little bit of a blip at the beginning. Didn't want to throw 7 minutes of content away. So that little 4 or 5 second hiccup, once again, I apologize for it. Forgot again, this was the time of the year where I'm supposed to switch out the batteries in the smoke detectors. Anywho, we move on to Breakdown segment 2. Of course, every Friday night, we look at the best in new music, albums, songs, and concert reviews. Now, we've got a big one for you this week, the brand new album from Styx, Circling from Above. Hasn't been a long wait for this album. It was pretty quick turnaround from when they announced it to when it was finally released here, which was, of course, last Friday, July the 18th. We only got one single from it, so we didn't get a lot of music to listen to ahead of time. Of course, Build and Destroy was the one single that was released. Counting instrumentals and interludes, you have 13 tracks here on Circling from Above, and of course, as always here on the Fortress of Rock, we will go through them track by track. So we start off, yes, with an instrumental. The title track, if you want to call it that, Circling from Above, starts off side 1. I find this very interesting, a little bit of an homage to vinyl. And of course, even though vinyl's big again, it used to be big back when Styx was becoming huge in the late 70s and early 80s. So it's kind of neat that even though I got the physical CD, you open up the liner notes, and kudos to them for giving you a nice booklet with all the lyrics. They split it up in the CD booklet between side 1 and side 2. So I will, in deference to Styx, go ahead and follow through on that. So side 1 starts with the intro, the instrumental, Circling from Above. And I will say right now, I told a friend of mine this. He was listening to the album along with me. You know, we kind of listen to the same types of music. We go to concerts together. So we tend to listen to these new releases. And we compared notes. And I told him, I said, one of these things that drives me crazy with bands is the short minute or 2-minute instrumental or intro to a song. 9 times out of 10, they are an absolute waste of my time, your time, everybody's time. On occasion, they'll strike gold with something interesting or cool, but it's very, very rare. And I will tell you that Circling from Above is no exception to my rule. It's a waste. It's 2 minutes. It's a waste. I'm sure it serves some purpose for Tommy Shaw and the guys in the narrative I guess they're trying to tell here. Now, I think I mentioned that when initially this album was announced, it was announced as a concept album about birds. And then here a few weeks ago, reading the initial early reviews, those rumors were completely dispelled. And I breathed a sigh of relief. I don't have a problem with a band being ambitious and putting out a concept album, but this sounded like it could have been an absolute train wreck. And so thankfully it is not a concept album about birds. It's a very diverse album in terms of the styles of music. And in many, many ways it reminds me, I'm almost looking at it as the lost album that could have fit well between Paradise Theater and Kilroy Was Here. As it tries to be, again, a concept album, it tries to be a little more ambitious and high-minded with all the different musical stylings. Now, fair warning, as we're getting into the second song here, which was the only single, Build and Destroy, which is still the catchiest song to me on the whole album. Still very good. And the more I listen to it, the catchier it gets. The more it becomes an earworm. And Build and Destroy has that classic Styx, late 70s, early 80s sound. One of many songs on this album to harken back to that Paradise Theater, Grand Illusion, Pieces of Eight era. The keyboards, of course, you know the distinctive sound of the keyboards in a Styx song. They're present here. So Build and Destroy comes out of the useless circling from above. So unfortunately, you just got to write off the instrumental. Just say, forget it. Okay? One less true song to deal with. So then we move on from track 2 to track 3 is Michigan. And when I first saw the title, I was thinking, wow. That's an odd title for a song. Doesn't mean the song's bad. I'm just thinking, how are they going to work Michigan into the chorus? Well, this is one of those songs, and there are many in the archives of classic rock where the title is never mentioned in the song. Very catchy chorus, all around the world the wheels are turning. Now, I like this song, again, talking about comparing notes with my buddy. I liked it more than he did. I thought it was very good, very catchy, solid follow-up leading out of Build and Destroy. The one thing he said, though, that I'm still not 100% sold on it, but if we're going to read into the lyrics, and I think that's what Styx wants you to do here, is they want you to find the depth in the lyrics. He said the name Michigan and a line like "the wheels are turning" leads him into thinking this song might be about the rise and fall of the American automobile industry. And I was like, wow, I like that. I won't buy into it 100% right now, but I like that thinking. So we're off to a pretty solid, pretty decent start here. And then we get into King of Love, track 4. And the great thing about Styx is they always try to give, as much as they can, they try to spread out the vocal duties. It used to be between Tommy Shaw and Dennis DeYoung, and James Young would get a song or two every album. And then, of course, now they've swapped Dennis DeYoung. He's out, and they've got a couple other guys, of course, who've come in. Lawrence Gowan, right? But this is your James Young song, at least in part. And his vocal style is so much different. You got the operatic, over the top, Dennis DeYoung. Now it's Lawrence Gowan, I believe. He is the guy who's replaced Dennis DeYoung. And then, of course, Tommy Shaw is the more plaintive, honest, Midwest, straight on rock and roll voice. And then James Young has always been that more demonic, dark tone. We've heard him star on songs like Miss America and Snowblind, classic Styx songs. And King of Love fits right in with those. Now Tommy Shaw jumps in like he did in those songs as well and helps out and gives you an interesting tonal shift within the song. So we're off to a great start here, in my opinion. Again, outside of the unnecessary first 2 minutes and the instrumental stuff. Track 5 is still solid. It's clear. Some very... I know, I'm not the most technical person when it comes to music. I don't dive into the details about the brand of keyboards they're using or the brand of guitar they're using. So to me, it's clear that what stood out here is the Victorian keyboard interludes is what I'm calling them. And I know somebody's out there going, you don't understand what type of keyboard that is, you dolt? No, I got better things to do with my life than immerse myself to the point where I don't do anything else but do a deep dive into every freaking song I ever listened to. And It's Clear has a nice, solid, Tommy Shaw-led, mildly catchy chorus. And that leads into the first weak part of the album. And this, again, sticking with the pattern that Styx set up. This is the last song on what they're calling side 1 of Circling from Above. This song is Forgive. Now, we mentioned Dennis DeYoung, and I will always acknowledge and appreciate his input to the classic Styx sound. But I will also acknowledge the fact that towards the end, he was responsible for some of Styx's worst songs. Babe comes to mind. And while Forgive isn't that bad, it's a little bit on the cheesy side, leaning towards the old Dennis DeYoung sound. So not a big fan of Forgive. And then you jump into, as they're calling it, side 2. And a review I read, number one, the review dispelled the whole bird motif thing. But it also pointed out that there are a lot of classic rock influences you can hear on this album. Now, I think they went a little too far with some of it, but once you get into the second half of the album, you can definitely start to hear some of that. Again, not as much as this review made it seem like, unless they're going to count Styx's classic sound. Yes, there are songs on side 1, especially, that sound a lot like old school, late 70s, early 80s Styx. But here, when we get to, again, what they're calling side 2, then other bands' influences start to creep in. And it starts with track 7, Everybody Raise a Glass. Queen guitar. That's all I have to say. You can easily hear Queen's influence on this song. It's also Again, in terms of the Styx pantheon, it harkens back to Paradise Theater. I liked it. Maybe not as much as some of the earlier songs, but I still liked it. Then we switch completely in terms of tone to the acoustic guitar driven Blue-Eyed Raven, where Tommy Shaw takes over. And this sounds a lot, especially when you get the fiddle interlude. Sounds a lot like a Charlie Daniels Band song, sung by Tommy Shaw. And that's not a bad thing. I enjoyed Blue-Eyed Raven. I thought it was a really, really good song. Gypsy woman, cast your spell. Then we kind of stumble a bit with track 9, She Knows. We've got clarinet, we've got strings. Again, in the background this time, not as much in the front as they were in Everybody Raise a Glass, but the subtle background Queen guitars are there again. But She Knows is one of the weaker songs on the album, and then we get another musical interlude. 45 seconds, Ease Your Mind. Piano based. It's just, again, it's a pet peeve of mine. I don't like, this is a waste of time to me. Just get into the next song or include this as part of the next song if that's what you want. But don't tell me a 45-second piece of music is a standalone because it's that important. Like I said, there are exceptions, but 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work. So that leads us into track 11, The Things That You Said. And this is really where the album really shifts for me. Now, I have not been able to discern a connecting theme throughout this album. But the last 3 songs seem to have a little bit of a tether running through them. The Things That You Said has a very menacing, if you read the lyrics, if you listen to the lyrics, a very menacing tone to it, not necessarily musically. Because you've got some strings in there maybe, and you've got the shift between some heavy keyboards and then to piano. But they're singing about only you can control the maniac inside. Wow. Okay. So I guess trying to read into it, they're trying to at least tell you you've got anger issues. You need to find some self-control. Hence the maniac inside. Now, are they talking about a character in particular, or are they talking about all of us? It's interesting. I will give it that. It's interesting. And then that song, and I like that song, solid. That leads into We Lost the Wheel Again. Now, there's another reference to wheels. Going back to Michigan, does that play into what my buddy thought with the whole automotive industry? Is that involved here somehow, some way? But it's obvious in terms of musical influences that this song is an early Who song in terms of its feel. A little bit off kilter, a little bit comical, musically, lyrically, driven by acoustic guitar, but there are electric guitar touches in it. This was one of my favorite songs on the album, just because of how different it was, and it still worked, and it was still catchy. And then that leads us into the album closer, Only You Can Decide, which I have to be honest, one of my least favorite songs on the album. Tommy Shaw singing this borderline ballad. It's heavy-handed. I guess it's trying to give the album a hopeful ending. Now, where it ties in, especially with track 11, The Things That You Said, where that song seemed to be implying control your anger. Only You Can Decide has a similar tone to it, even though musically it's more of a ballad. But it's talking about guns. Only you can decide your fate. So you can kind of see where I'm going with, at least maybe there's not a direct connection because you've got We Lost the Wheel Again stuck there in the middle. And I'm not sure if there's a way to connect the three songs directly, but you can definitely connect The Things That You Said to the album closer, Only You Can Decide. So where do we go with all this? I could see somebody listening to this album. Now, of course, it depends. Are you a Styx fan? Are you not a Styx fan? That's a big influence here because this is definitely an old school Styx album. Shifts in tone, shifts in vocal stylings, music stylings, and that makes it exciting to me. It's like one of these movies I don't know if you guys are into movies or not. I am. And one thing I remember hearing years and years ago is movie critics will always tend to side with the artsy-fartsy, pretentious stuff that's different just because they're forced to watch every movie. And since 90% of the movies out there are all the same formulaic stuff, superhero stuff, generic rom-coms, generic action movies, that just when something's different, they tend to love it more regardless of if it's actually good or not. So I could see somebody taking that tact, that attitude with Circling from Above. It's so different given the current musical landscape. Now, it's different compared to other music now, but it's similar in that it sounds like a Styx album lost from the late 70s or early 80s, because that's what Styx did. Now, this might be a little bit more extreme. So in that sense, I have to recommend it because it's a fascinating group of songs. Again, take out the two instrumentals, please. I'm not going to say it's the best album of the year. I'm not going to say it's even close. But it's at least an interesting listen that I will listen to again and again. For no other reason that it's not boring. There is no way anybody could call this album boring. It's a fascinating, interesting, I would say mostly hit, but a little miss project from Styx. So check out Circling from Above. The Maestro not completely recommends, but wholeheartedly recommends. How about that? Again, not going to be the best album of the year. I'm hopeful that we're going to get a couple more really good albums before the end of the year. The slate looks pretty solid from late August through September into October. We've had a couple really good albums so far this year, so Styx probably, I won't say definitively, probably won't make my top 5 at the end of 2025, but it's still a very good album, and you guys should check it out. Now, real quick, I was talking about reviewing this week Billy Joel, the documentary on HBO Max, the two-part documentary, And So It Goes. But I did not know, because it just dropped last Friday, right around the time I was recording last week's episode of The Fortress of Rock. I knew it was two parts, but I did not realize that first they were going to drop part one last Friday, and then part two is dropping right around now as I record this episode. So, next week, I have to watch part two. Next week, I will give you my full review of Billy Joel, And So It Goes. The other part of this, where I have a big problem with HBO Max on this, because they recently had a Pee Wee Herman documentary, and they did the same thing. They broke it up into two parts, but, especially with the Billy Joel, part one is 2.5 hours long. Part one. So I'm anticipating the same for part two. So we're looking at what? 5 hours of content here? And you said, let's split it in half? I think you could have done a better job. Maybe split it up into 4, maybe 6 episodes, shorter episodes. Spread it out a little bit longer if you needed to. But 2.5 hours. See, there's something wrong with that. And the Pee Wee Herman one was similar in that I think, as I recall, both part one and part two were over an hour and a half, bordering on 2 hours each. Don't hold me to that, but why are you making these like movie length? A movie is a movie. A movie is 2 to 3 hours, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. If it's longer, oh boy. But why are you making these movie length episodes and then saying it's a multi-part documentary? I think some editing would have done this documentary good. But that being said, I have knocked out part one. Very interesting. Focuses a lot on Billy Joel's first marriage with his wife Elizabeth and what happened with them. I'll get more into detail on it next week when I review the entire documentary. I will say this, if you want to get a head start, it's worth watching. I won't say it's the most insightful, greatest documentary ever, but it's definitely very, very interesting and entertaining. That leads us into our final review for the week. One song, you knew it was coming. It was one of our number one songs, one of our top songs last week. Maybe it'll be again this week. Who knows? 38 Special, brand new song from Don Barnes and the Boys. First single from the upcoming album Milestone, which will be out September the 19th. All I Haven't Said. Now, I loved Don Barnes' voice back in the classic era with 38 Special back in the 80s. Loved his voice. He's still the front man here. Now, he's the only core member from the classic lineup still left, but some of these guys have been with him, similar to like a situation with Foreigner, where some of these guys have been with him as 38 Special has been touring pretty regularly over the years, just not recording. So again, we mentioned, by the way, Milestone is the first studio album in 21 years. We mentioned that last week from 38 Special. So these guys, some of these guys have been with Don Barnes in 38 Special for decades now. So it's a pretty consistent lineup. It's just not the lineup that we remember from the 80s with Jeff Carlisi and the double drummers. But the good news is that All I Haven't Said sounds like classic 38 Special, with, albeit, a little bit weaker vocal performance from Don Barnes. He doesn't sound the same. Not bad, but he does not sound the same. It's obvious that the years have taken a toll on his voice. So that's a little disheartening, but if you can get beyond that, and I can, All I Haven't Said sounds like they have not missed a beat. You would never believe if I didn't tell you, and you didn't know, that this is the first new album and new material they've put out in 21 years. It sounds just like classic 38 Special. So outside of a little bit weaker vocals from Don Barnes, All I Haven't Said is a tremendous first single from Milestone, so I heartily recommend that as well. So all positivity for the most part. Yeah, little, it's, when you review a whole album, you're never gonna, unless it's an absolute drop dead classic, there's always gonna be a song or two or an instrumental that you're gonna criticize. So let's just go all positive. Listen to Styx, Circling from Above, and listen to the new song from 38 Special, All I Haven't Said. So now that will lead us to our little weekly stroll out to the garage here at the Fortress of Rock. Doc Brown waiting for me. He's a little bit happier with me now that he knows that for the foreseeable future, we're not going to have any old classic album reviews like we've been doing on occasion here recently, because now we've got concerts and we've got albums to fill up the next 2 or 3 months. So he's a little bit happy about that. He's just doing his normal duty here as I strap myself in to the rock and roll DeLorean, and he gets us fired up to 1.21 gigawatts and 88 miles an hour as we head into the rock and roll time stream for I Want to Go Back, our look back at anniversaries of classic album releases, birthdays, and moments in rock and roll history. Now, I'll real quick take care of some business here as we're getting up to speed. First up, you know where to find us. You're listening to us, you found us somewhere. Always good to have options and choices. For the Fortress of Rock, you can find us on Spotify, Good Pods, Pocket Casts, Apple, Overcast, Castbox, Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. We are also on Facebook. That is our social media imprint for now. And it has been for years. 2 things we do every weekend that are fun. First up, Sunday is New Music Sunday. I will post a link to a music video on YouTube, a new song for you to check out and approve or disapprove of. Hopefully, I will get a good song so you'll approve. Usually works out well, but there are times when I've thrown a song out there and it's kind of hit with a big thud. Not sure yet what the video is going to be for this coming Sunday, but I'm sure I will find one. So check that out every Sunday afternoon on the Fortress of Rock Facebook page. And then tonight, we release, of course, the brand new podcast episode, which you're listening to, but we also do the Weekend Rock Project every Friday night on our Facebook page. I will give you a word, a phrase, a theme, an idea, and you have to come back with a song, your favorite rock song, that fits that word, theme, idea, or whatever. And this week I do have it now. You're getting a little taste of it. Now you might hear this after it's posted, but I haven't posted it yet. So there's a chance the episode here could drop before the Weekend Rock Project. We go through life, and hopefully we have at least a small group of really good friends, right? And it's sad if you don't have at least a handful of friends that you can depend upon throughout your life. But unfortunately, especially with the way the world is now, you usually have a few enemies as well. So your Weekend Rock Project is looking for your best, your favorite rock songs, with songs that contain the word friend or enemy, or acceptable variations of the two. Once again, friend and enemy. And I'm sure somebody out there will dig up a song that has both words in it and get double points. But that is your Weekend Rock Project for this weekend. And you can find it every Friday night on our Facebook page, the Weekend Rock Project. Always a lot of fun. And I usually jump in. Now this is on my personal page, because I share it on my personal Facebook page. And I usually, with my friends, when they comment, we'll have a little fun and go back and forth. But I will also comment on any suggestions or songs that you will post on our Fortress of Rock page as well. I usually do that every Sunday, right around the time I'm posting New Music Sunday in that video. Then I also have to acknowledge my sources. A lot of this stuff I can come up with on my own, especially the opinions, definitely mine and mine alone, but the factual stuff, the dates, that type of thing, three main sources for all of that good stuff: ultimateclassicrock.com, thisdayinmusic.com, and the vanhalennewsdesk.com. And that, of course, comes into play when we have some Van Halen news, which usually comes in big floods and torrents. Right now, not a lot happening on the Van Halen front. I'm sure things will pick up here once we're getting closer to the release of the third Mammoth album. All right, Doc Brown has given me the thumbs up. So we are up to speed. It is time for I Want to Go Back. Let us start off with birthdays here for July the 25th. All right, so we start off with July the 25th, 1958 for our birthdays. My daughter, I know she's into this band. I've never been able to get into them. But one of the core members of Sonic Youth, guitarist Thurston Moore, born on this day in 1958. Born on this day, July the 25th, 1951, Verdine White, bass player for Earth, Wind, and Fire. It's a shame he wasn't born in September. Born on this day, July the 25th, 1946, Jose Chapito Arias, percussionist for Santana. Born on this day, July the 25th, 1943, Jim McCarty, drummer for the Yardbirds. Then finally in birthdays, July the 25th, 1941, Manny Charlton, guitar player for Nazareth. Moving on to anniversaries for July the 25th. We'll start off with July the 25th, 2014. Weird Al Yankovic had the #1 album in the U.S. on this day with Mandatory Fun. Now, significant, obviously, for being the #1 album on the U.S. charts, but it was also the first comedy album in over 50 years to top the Billboard album chart. On this day, July the 25th, 2003, Eric Braun, guitarist for Iron Butterfly, passed away. I think I've told you guys this before. I've got a friend, very good friend, who loves to respond randomly to emails I might send him with Inagata Davida, baby. There you go. On this day, July the 25th, 1983, Metallica releases their debut album, Kill 'Em All. And the world would never be the same again. Now, remember earlier on, talking about Chuck Mangione, I mentioned we were going to delve on occasion here and there into soft rock. Well, this is the other point here for the next minute or two, where we're going to do that. On this day, July the 25th, 1981, the #1 single in the United States, get ready to cringe, Air Supply's The One That You Love. Now, we counter that with another reference I made earlier on, talking about the importance of Blizzard of Oz by Ozzy Osbourne. And I will argue that even though everybody has their personal albums, as I mentioned earlier, that we all gravitate towards, and we say, these are my top 10 albums of all time. These are my top 20 albums of all time. But at the same time, we will also acknowledge, true rock and roll fans will acknowledge that even though I love this album and it doesn't quite make it personally for me in my top 20 or top 10, it's still one of the greatest albums of all time, and I completely, wholeheartedly acknowledge that. That is one of these moments. July the 25th, 1980. A day that will live in infamy for rock and roll in a good way. A little bit of a contradiction there. AC/DC releases Back in Black on this day in 1980. I would argue possibly the most important album ever released in rock history. But again, it's not my favorite album of all time, but it's really good. It's really, really good. And that's one of those albums when I was growing up, along with Blizzard of Oz and Don't Say No. So important, and it was a connecting device between all of us. We all would sit and listen to that album together, or even if we listened to it separately, we'd listen to it in the car on the way to school in the morning, or coming home from school in the afternoon in the cassette player. Back in Black. I would make an argument. I'm a Van Halen fan, you guys know that. The first Van Halen album is definitely up there. But even I have to acknowledge how important Back in Black is in the history of rock and roll. And then we're going to shift back again to cheesy pop rock. I feel so bad that I had to sandwich the great, the glorious Back in Black between Air Supply and now this, our final anniversary. July the 25th, 1970. The number one song in the U.S. on this day in 1970 was The Carpenters. They Long to Be Close to You. That's kind of a cruel rock and roll joke right there. An AC/DC sandwich with some awful, terrible bread. Oh, too bad we didn't have bread to talk about. They would have fit in great with Air Supply and the Carpenters. All right, even that got a little bit of a chuckle out of Doc Brown as he turns us back around here in the rock and roll time stream, taking us back to the garage at the Fortress of Rock. Nice, pleasant summer night here, Friday night, July the 25th. Little hot, but not too bad. Little muggy, but still, I'll take it. We're going to pull the drawbridge up over the moat, start to shut things down here. But of course, as I walk back to the studio, you know we still got one final segment left. I Want to Go Back was, of course, our tribute to the late, great Eddie Money. Now our fourth and final segment is Wrap It Up, which is our tribute to the fabulous Thunderbirds. We just looked at the past in rock and roll. The first two segments look at present day rock and roll, and now we look to the future. What's going to be on the Fortress of Rock over the next month or month plus? What songs have we got to look forward to? What albums? And then, of course, we will wrap things up with the Fortress of Rock charts. Almost said the Billboard charts, but that, of course, is not true. We'll discuss that in a second. So next week on the Fortress of Rock, our featured album review is the new album from Bush, I Beat Loneliness. And as I mentioned, also, we will review the full Billy Joel HBO Max documentary, And So It Goes. So Bush and Billy Joel for you next week, episode 205 of the Fortress of Rock, dropping on August the 1st. In 2 weeks, the brand new album from Honeymoon Suite. It is out today. Bush has been out for a week. Today, July the 25th, is the release date for Honeymoon Suite. Wake Me Up When the Sun Goes Down, their brand new album. That will be our featured review on episode 206, dropping on August the 8th. In 3 weeks, we get back to live concert reviews. And it's Slaughter again. I've already gone into the details on how we are seeing Slaughter again for the second time in just over a month. Great White and Slaughter live in concert, Shipshewana, Indiana. That is our featured concert review, episode 207, dropping on August the 15th. In 4 weeks, at some point, I'm not going to commit to this in 4 weeks, but at some point, I've got to get into that new Collective Soul documentary. Give me a word, the Collective Soul story. I have it, the Blu-ray. And the problem is when you buy stuff, sometimes, not with albums, you can always listen to them in the car. But when it comes to these documentaries, these movies, if you buy them, your mind, I don't know about yours, but my mind tends to say, well, now you've got it. It's there whenever you want to watch it, but you've got to watch this on streaming. You've got to watch that on streaming, because if you don't, it could go away. Or are you going to cancel that subscription? Are you done with HBO Max, which I'm getting ready to be. As soon as I get done with Billy Joel, I think I'm axing that for a little while. But you know what I'm talking about. When you have something, you bought it, it's sitting there, you have a tendency to go, okay, it's there whenever it's convenient for me. And that's fine, but you tend to push it off in terms of things that seem a little more urgent to listen to or to watch. So it might be earlier than 4 weeks, but at some point soon we're going to get to that Collective Soul documentary. Once again, give me a word, the Collective Soul story. But definitely for sure in 4 weeks, more concert reviews. Warren DeMartini, Steve Piercy. Of course, to me, it's Rat. Stephen Piercy, Warren DeMartini, that is Rat. Sorry, Bobby Blatzer. Sorry, Juan Crochet. You guys can't figure it out, but at least we're getting the voice of Rat and the lead guitarist of Rat, and that's pretty close. We've got that on the slate. We've got tickets for it. We will review that show for you from New Buffalo, Michigan. Or is that Indiana? I can never remember if New Buffalo is across the border or not. Anyway, the casino up there, they have got Stephen Piercy and Warren DeMartini. We will review that show for you in episode 208, dropping on August the 22nd. Then we keep going 5 weeks out. Episode 209, dropping on August the 29th. Our review of Shinedown and Bush, live from the Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, Indiana. And then, 6 weeks out, yeah, we're going there, episode 210, dropping on September the 5th. Our review of the great David Lee Roth in concert in Gary, Indiana. And we might also have The Hives, the brand new album. We might push that back a week. So definitely David Lee Roth, September the 5th. Possibly The Hives Forever The Hives as well. Now The Hives we might push back to September the 12th. So a whole lot going on for the next month and a half, kids. We are not going to be lacking in any way, shape, or form of new stuff to discuss, new music and concerts to review. In terms of songs, I'm not, as I mentioned, I get a lot of my new songs from the new release radar. The release radar that I get every Friday from Spotify, but they haven't really been doing a really good job. So, didn't see anything today that really impressed me. Now, last week I mentioned we were looking at the Alice Cooper group. And the song was Up All Night, but now the full album is already out. The Revenge of Alice Cooper is out today. Honeymoon Suite out today. Alice Cooper out today. So really not a point to reviewing one song when maybe eventually we'll get around to reviewing the entire album. We still are going to review Robert Plant, his new song, Everybody's Song. That's a cover song. A lot of the songs on his upcoming new album are cover songs. With Saving Grace, his new band. The album is called Saving Grace. So I've listened to it. It's a very intriguing song. So that one we've still got down. The new song from the Black Moods, Suit Yourself. I don't know what they're doing. They are frustrating me beyond all belief. This is what, the sixth or the seventh, possibly the eighth song they've released off their album Passion. And they're trying something new and different that I hate. Wherever they're getting their advice, if they're getting advice, you guys need to rework it. Go back in, figure out a new business model. Because from what I can tell, you can't get the new album Passion. Here's the thing. You can't get it anywhere except through their website. Okay. You want to be that band, that performer, that's fine. So you can go to their website and get the new album Passion. $15 plus shipping. Not thrilled with that, but okay. Here's my multiple issues and problems with this distribution model. Number one, you go to the website to buy the album. It's there. They say they'll sell it to you for $15 plus shipping and postage and all that good stuff. They won't tell you the track list. They won't tell you how many songs are on the album, what sequence they're in. You go to their Facebook page, same thing. They say, hey, go to our website to buy the new album. Won't tell you the song sequence or the song list. And the other complaint I have, okay, you can't get it through Amazon on CD, but you can't even get it digitally through Amazon. And I'm assuming all the other music retailers. So the only way you can order their new album from the Black Moods is through their website, and you have to just trust that it's going to have, 11, 12, even 10 songs on it, because they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you. Sorry, guys. You've went too far with this. This is stupid, sloppy marketing and sales. You need to get your butts in gear. I know you're trying to be cool and hip and modern, but at least put a digital version out with the major digital music retailers so we can get it. All right? Not that hard. Stop being stubborn and arrogant and thinking you've got it all figured out, because your business model right now stinks. So maybe we'll review their new song, Suit Yourself. I would prefer it if we could review their full album here on the Fortress of Rock, but I am not going to buy into this. I'm all for supporting bands, buying stuff through their website, if they make it affordable. If I have to pay $1 or $2 more, I get it. The money's going to the band more directly than through a big retailer. But still, show some respect for your fan base. Then we've got to listen to some Shinedown, because we're going to be, obviously, we just mentioned it, going to see Shinedown. They've got a relatively new song out called Killing Fields. I still haven't heard anything about a new album. I might have to do some more digging on that. But again, I haven't seen anything on Amazon indicating a new album. This is the new marketing model, and it's very frustrating. And then finally, Rob Thomas has 2 new songs out, Hard to Be Happy and Thrill Me, which we will get to eventually here on the Fortress of Rock. And that's pretty much what you're looking at in terms of songs right now. I don't understand the Alter Bridge thing. They announced they're going to put a new album out at the beginning of January. No single yet. That's another really weird, unique marketing ploy. We're going to tell you guys we got a new album coming out, but you're not getting a taste of it yet. All right. Would have liked at least one single to sit out there for a couple months and listen to. Maybe next week. And that leads us into the Fortress of Rock charts for July the 25th, 2025. Of course, I've told you, I tell you every week, I was a slave to the Billboard charts from the mid-70s into the early 90s. I would stop at Barnes & Noble, or when I was younger, the local supermarket with my parents, and I would gravitate to the magazine rack and read all the Billboard charts. The Hot 100, the Top 200 album chart, the rock chart, which I loved, and then they ruined that, but then eventually they ruined all of it with SoundScan and the streaming stuff. And so now it's complete and absolute garbage, but that's why we took the unprecedented step of creating our own chart a year and a half ago here on the Fortress of Rock. So we give you every week our top album and our top 2 songs. No surprise, for the second week in a row, our top album is Styx, Circling from Above. As far as our top songs, and of course I always pick 2 because 2 is better than 1. Couple of repeat offenders. Not necessarily from last week, though. One, yes. 38 Special. Great first single from the upcoming album Milestone. We just reviewed it. All I Haven't Said spends its second week at the top of our song chart here on the Fortress of Rock. Then we're going to go back a few weeks. Even though we had a lot of different songs to choose from off the brand new album from Styx, again, it's just burrowed its way into my brain and I can't get it out. It hasn't been at the top of our chart for a while, but it is back. Styx, Build and Destroy, shares the honors for top song this week. So once again, to recap, top album here on the Fortress of Rock for July the 25th, 2025 is Styx, Circling from Above. Top songs are 38 Specials, All I Haven't Said, and Styx with Build and Destroy. So there you go, kids. That is a wrap. The Fortress of Rock is done for another week. Thank you very much, as always, for hanging out with me, discussing the great Ozzy Osbourne and the new album from Styx. Hope you had as much fun listening as I did bringing it to you. And we'll do it all again in 7 days. Enjoy the rest of the summer. We've got a little over a month, maybe a month and a half to go. Don't waste it. Enjoy it. Hug your kids. Love the ones you're with. I am the Maestro Kevin Crane, the Ayatollah of rock and rolla. You didn't think I'd forget to slip that in, did you? I am who I am, you are who you are, and until we meet again, peace out.